I can hear you. Any questions?
Lou wanted to say something.
Yes, go ahead, Lou.
Oh, just a moment. I'm getting my vision back here. I was going to say that people interested in movies that would give some feeling for this, there are movies of surfaces moving in 3 space, such as the turning of the sphere inside out.
Oh,
And the
that's
turning of the sphere inside out is actually can be visualized as a kind of 4-dimensional operation. So there aren't any really good movies about 2 spheres in 4 space. I think people have asked you the right question there. Got to team up with graphics people and make some movies of these movies.
You've given me a lot of work here.
Yes.
I'll have to work on that right away.
That's what happens. You open your mouth and you get homework placed in front of you. That's right.
I know. I should give that to my students. That's why, pass it off to them.
Left as an exercise for the student.
Hey, Lou, do you think Charles Gunn might be interested? He's good on.
Oh, yeah, Charlie Gunn has done all kinds of things along these very lines. So are you in touch with him? I haven't seen him since that last ANPA.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I am in touch with him. So I can certainly phone him or message him and say, are you interested? Well, I mean, he's very involved with animators generally. So if he's not interested, he might know somebody else. Yeah,
that's right. I mean, he's been central to many, many very wonderful mathematical visualization movies.
Yeah. So we might be able to help you out, Sam.
Great, that would be helpful. The graphics in my talk need to be improved, I'm for sure.
Oh, I wanted to mention another thing.
Yes.
Which you might have mentioned, Sam. I don't know if you did, but there's another, along with the Yoshikawa moves, there's a generalized Reidemeister move, where you think of bits of surface moving through one another, called Rosenman moves.
Oh yes, that's the different method.
And they're very intuitive, so people might like to look at Rosenman's paper or some paper with a good illustration of Rosenman moves. Maybe you have a suggestion about what paper would be good.
Well, there's several books by Carter, who's written some books on surfaces. True. That's essentially the same school. There are 2 schools for dealing with embeddings in higher dimensional space, higher dimensional knot theory. One is the cross-sectional method. The other is to use projections. There are many books there are 3 books by Carter on that. And they're beautifully done, and they have beautiful graphics inside. So if you're interested in the projection approach, the Rosenman approach, you can look at those. I find it's easier to visualize things in terms of cross sections, but I'm biased. There are other ways of doing this. I like to slice things up and take a look at them and see what their integral parts are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was it tomography? PET scan.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Neither.
So do we have any?
Well, I had my hand up, but it was. I mean, it's really.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm just so. I'm so coming from nowhere. I mean, like you, Richard, I was actually late because I had some problems getting on for some reason. And then a bit of tooth came out, so I had to take time out to phone my dentist. Because otherwise it would be too late to get an emergency appointment. So I got little bits. So I'll just ask where I came in, you were talking about Morse something, M-O-R-S-E, and if you could just introduce me to because later it was coming in Morse singularities. So that's presumably, that looks as that would be like a basic question that would help me to begin with.
Oh, intuitively, it's a very nice idea. A Morse function is a smooth map of what a geometric object you're looking at onto the real line. So the real line is the height. The value of the function is the height of points on the geometric object. And if you take the inverse image of that, of the height function, it gives you the slices of the geometric the hyperplane cross sections. And there's a great deal of work that's been done by that. Morse, who's now passed away, he used to be at the Institute of Advanced Study, developed a whole theory of how to decompose manifolds using a height function. It's a very simple idea.
Yeah.
And the beauty is that the function has singular points, but you can always jiggle the surface, as I said, a little bit until all the singular points are isolated. And what I've done in the examples I'm looking at, and taking it one step further, I pushed all the saddle points into the same cross section. And that simplifies things a lot, because if you do that, then all you need for, at least for knots in 4 space, is one 3-dimensional cross section. You can actually visualize using the cross-sectional method everything in 3 dimensions that way. And I've tried to push this up to 6 dimension, but so far I've not succeeded. I did it for 5 in the talk. I used 2 Morse functions, 2 height functions, one for time and one for hypertime. But it seems to get too complicated for 6 dimensions. It'd be a fun thing to try, but perhaps 5 is the limit of this method.
Well, that's really, really helpful. But actually, you've now mentioned the other thing that I did not get at all, which was the hypertime. What you?
I needed to call. There were two additional dimensions. Here we live in 3-dimensional space, so we can think of time as the 4th dimension. And then I went up to 5 space, maybe Klutz-Klein theory or something like that, and you need a 5th dimension to put everything in. And so I call that 5th dimension not time, but hypertime. That's all, just a simple name.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
You have 3 directions to move in, and now they gave you 2 other directions to move in 5 space.
Right. Okay, so I'm now able to start at kindergarten level. That's lovely, thank you.
Oh, no. It's fun visualizing objects in 4-dimensional space as well as 5-dimensional space. And it'd be nice if this had some applications to physics, and just visualizing some of the geometrically some of the different fields that are there. And one possible candidate, I believe, Klutz-Klein theory is 5-dimensional. I think he's able to put everything in. I could be wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So maybe you can use this for visualizing some of the physics in that situation.
And in the superstring theory, you could think of knotted brains if you let them be high enough dimensional. So if it's a 10-dimensional superstring theory, then you can have knotted brains of 8 dimensions. So you're going to have quite a number of movies to get to that 8-dimensional knot.
You need more height functions, won't you? That would be very interesting. Yeah, that would be fun. There may be a way of dealing with that. If essentially for 6 dimensions, you need 3 height functions, and perhaps there's a way of handling that.
I've been thinking of this in a different setting.
Yes.
Thinking of, say, sociological databases where you measure a population and all sorts of things. And there are lots of places where you want to draw a picture of something that's more than 2 or 3 dimensions. And
absolutely.
One way to do it is with small multiples, copies of the same, of parallel projections into different settings. And I'm not quite sure how one would move between them dynamically, and this is where I'm going.
Oh, data science, that's big stuff these days. A lot of people are working with higher dimensional data and different ways of dealing with it. One tool that's useful is what they call persistent homology. You have a huge database and you have some sort of metrics to find distance. And what you look at the space, how should I say it? You choose you choose an epsilon, and for each epsilon, you draw a ball around each data point in the space. And for each epsilon, these balls intersect and they form a space. And as you evolve the epsilon, the geometry of the data space changes dynamically. And one way of understanding how the data is changing that way is to use homology. For each epsilon, you compute a homology group of the epsilon space, and you look at how the homology groups as epsilon varies in different values, and that's the one way they study the geometry of the data sets. And apparently there's big money in that right now. I think DARPA is putting a lot of money into data science. Be interesting if some of the higher dimensional knot theory techniques could actually be used in data science. Very interesting.
If I could just interject, so I'm going to be the last speaker, and I'm going to talk about how a knot is homologous with a cell. So I'm going to suggest to you that you could actually recapitulate physiology using the approach that you're using.
Oh, interesting. Oh. And what aspects of physiology are you studying, or
well, yeah. So for
examples?
example, yeah, in embryology, as you go from a zygote to each step, and finally to the offspring, those are, I think those are knots. You're interjecting energy into the system, and as you do so, you form a series of knots. So that's basically the cellular physiology of the embryo.
Oh, very interesting. There's work by Wilczek that might be helpful to you. He's written a number of articles on shape theory. He actually uses gauge theory to study how surfaces change. And that might be helpful to what you're doing.
So just to finish the thought then, and the final step is then meiosis, when you go back to reduction division, so you're going back to the circle, right?
I don't fully understand what you said. I'm sorry.
Well, I picked up on what Lou said in our previous ANPA, that the proof of a true mathematical knot is the ability to untie it. Well, that's what biology does. It unties the knots and goes back to the single cell, right?
Oh, yes. Very interesting. Yes, very interesting.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about that.
Oh, okay. I'm looking forward. What about DNA? It seems it's in a very tightly, in the cell, it's so collapsed into a very space. Do you have any ideas of how this would affect the unfolding of the DNA as the cell changes?
I think so. My bias is that once you transgress the cell membrane, you're not talking about biology anymore. DNA is derivative of the cell membrane code. So the cell membrane is creating the code, and then the DNA codifies that. But yes, of course, it would follow. But it would be a derivative, or I don't know if I'm using the term correctly, but it would be, I think it's derivative of what I'm talking about. Yes.
Well, the DNA has to unravel itself geometrically in order to produce the proteins or produce the RNA. So
right.
That's a good point. There's some interest. I'm looking forward to your talk.
So a classic example of what you're talking about is they're called homeobox genes. So those homeobox genes that determine the pattern of the organism actually fall along. The genes actually form the same pattern as the bow plan of the organism. So that's I think that's what you're referring to. Yes. Yes.
I guess I have to learn the terminology.
No, I know.
Homeobox genes. I haven't heard of that. I'll have to take a look at that. Very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
What time are you speaking?
I'm speaking at 8 o'clock.
8
5
o'clock.
o'clock, sorry, 3 o'clock our time. I'm in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. So it's 3 o'clock our time, American time.